It's time for a Drummer Nation. From age 4, Mike Clark was a prodigy, sitting in with bands in Texas and New Orleans, from which he credits his ability to synthesize many different regional styles. By the time he reached his early 20s, he was known as one of the founders of the distinctive East Bay sound coming out of Oakland, California. Mike gained worldwide recognition as one of America's foremost jazz and funk drummers while playing with Herbie Hancock in the early 70s. His incisive playing on Hancock's tune Actual Proof garnered him an international cult following and influenced generations of drummers throughout the world. Mike has performed with jazz luminaries including Herbie Hancock, Chet Baker, Wayne Shorter, Joe Henderson, and Gil Evans.
Created specifically for practice sessions, quiet tone practice cymbals by Sabian are designed to respond and feel like traditional cymbals, right down to their clearly defined bell, so the drummers won't have to change the way they play. Quiet tone practice cymbals by Sabian.
I absolutely love playing drums, and I couldn't imagine not having that in my life. And I really, if I could help facilitate that and have an impact on your life so that you could play drums, that means the world to me.
When seated at the drums, pressure on the tailbone, lower back, and hip joints can lead to pain. Only Carmichael drum thrones are scientifically designed to relieve and prevent discomforts associated with prolonged sitting. Carmichael thrones, we got your back. Mike Clark, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you, my friend?
Well, I'm great, and I'm honored to be on your show. Thanks for having me. I'm good.
Well, it's my honor. I say my friend, I don't know you, but I feel as though I do because I've been a fan of yours for a long time. We're going to cover your early days, but I first heard you play in 1973 when you were touring with Herbie Hancock behind that giant record Headhunters, or Chameleon, I think it was called.
Okay, this was in Texas? Did you tell me?
Well, I heard you at North Texas State University. I was a student there my freshman year.
Okay.
And again later that summer, I think I heard you in Atlanta.
Okay,
But
right.
you were knocking our socks off way back then, man, with your super cool linear funk thing. But let's back up, just so you know that I've been a fan of yours for so many years.
Okay.
I read a little bit about your background. You're from Sacramento, and your dad was a railroad guy.
He was.
So you traveled around a good bit, right?
Yeah, he was a railroad guy, but dig this, he was also a drummer, a jazz drummer. and not a very good one, but he always had drums and a huge jazz collection of records, and he played them constantly. And that was also his party music because he had his boys over all the time. And so I started playing when I was 4, and he took me to jam sessions. The first time I played his drums, it made sense. It was kind of the tom-tom Krupa thing. I guess I internalized it from listening to all those records since before I could walk that he played. And he took me to a gig that night, and it was a trad band, and we played Sweet Georgia Brown. I even took a solo.
And how old were you?
I think I was 5.
So I read you were something of a child prodigy. That's amazing. I
was actually, and and then he got me shortly after that. I got my hands together really quickly. You know how some guys grow at different points. You know, so he would get me gigs and bookings, and as he would travel as a railroad man, he would also call ahead, and if we couldn't get me as a guest soloist, then he would just take me to clubs all the time and buy the band a drink, or the band leader or the drummer give him $5 or $10 and have me sit in.
That's great. So you were very young prodigy, but you also, in traveling, heard all different kinds of music that way, didn't you?
Absolutely, yes. Certainly.
And what were some of the ones that you remember as being profoundly influential to you?
Well, he went to New Orleans a lot, so I heard parades, funerals, you know.
Sure.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is way back there, that I witnessed a couple of Mardi Gras Indian parades. I heard a ton of jazz. There was no rock and stuff or funk in the clubs yet, so it was all some type of jazz. And even on the trad gigs, they had modern kind of bebop drummers that needed work, so they were on those gigs and they were blowing it up. They were playing. They were really hitting. And so I met all kinds of great drummers when I was young. One of them was Paul Ferreira, the great drummer from Louis Primus band, and he showed me a bunch of stuff. And And those guys tolerated me coming in, and after a while I could sit in Al Hurt and Pete Fountain's club without my dad. I was 11 or 12, and and every once in a while they'd have me play.
Wow.
Yeah, so, yeah.
So you came up really entrenched in the bebop idiom, right? And post-bop and Spang-a-lang?
Yeah, big time. Like when I was about 9, I was into Gene Krupa. I was a Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich wannabe type drummer as a child. This is in the 50s, early 50s, and one day my dad brought home an Art Blakey record, not knowing who Art Blakey was. He just saw a guy playing drums on the cover, and that did it. You know what I mean? And then both of us were like, wow, this is fantastic. And we both started researching, and that led me to Charlie Parker and everything till right this very moment that we're talking.
Did you have some teachers back then, or you picked it up from your dad and clubs and hanging out and gigging?
Exactly, all that. I never had a formal lesson to this day except for reading, but never how to play. I never had but I did have a lot of great drummer friends, and we all talked to each other and shared ideas and showed each other stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind. It was like that kind of hand me down. I never had a formal guide to like right, left, and I did have a talent at that point in my life for understanding. I could hear what a guy was doing and get the sticking fairly close. I just could understand it for some reason. You know how all of our brains are different? That was part of the talent that I had. I could figure it out without having to put too much work into it. Not exactly, but on my terms. But I could get it.
That's a natural gift. That's a natural gift. That some people, somebody always had to show me, you know. A teacher would show me something and I'd say, man, I might have gone the rest of my life and not figured that out.
Yeah, well, some guys can read real good. Some guys can swing. Some guys can funk. Some guys can do the hand. I mean, and some guys can do it all, you know, like, and I had the couple of pieces of it together kind of naturally, and the rest of it I worked very hard, you know.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because ultimately you began to be known after Herbie as a funk drummer, as an exponent of the linear, whatever that means, Bay Area funk sound. How did that transition slip into your playing?
I think what our cymbals brought to the Sabian family is that there is lots more hand hammering. They're all hand hammered, and so you really have to perfect the hammering technique and where to hammer on the cymbal. You know, you don't want to get the cymbal too thin in a lot of places. They were willing to try it, and I think we came out with a great product that is a great musical instrument.
Well, let's see. I was with Woody Shaw and Bobby Hutcherson, Mose Allison. I'm not going to name them all. Joe Henderson. I got to name a couple of those guys because they were so bad. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a great resume.
Oh my God. And I was with Vince Guaraldi for 10 years, so it was all straight ahead. We didn't play any funk in those days. And they didn't call it funk either. But when Cannonball came out with Mercy Mercy and the term soul got popular, we started doing Horace Silver charts that was more like, let's say, Boogaloo sort of. And then and then I was on a lot of organ gigs, and we started playing like that. And right away, I instead of doing like the guys did on the records, I had that broken style of funk that I play. I just instinctively did it. I didn't practice it. I sharpened it up after I went, oh, this is pretty cool, after I started. But it just came to me. I hadn't heard the Tower of Power. I didn't know David or any of those guys yet. That's just how I rolled, so to speak.
Yeah. So you took elements of your jazz playing, which is highly interactive, non-repetitive, and heard these funk grooves out there and kind of naturally melded the two, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it didn't seem to be a problem. What seemed to be a problem for me after playing all that bebop and post-bop for so long was I wasn't acclimated, my mind wasn't acclimated to fills. I never even used those terms. I never had to do that kind of work before. So playing semi-simple drum parts, and then instead of like improvising, like playing a fill every so often, that was kind of a new world for me, and they had to calm me down because I wasn't that guy. I was like, well, fill what? What are you talking about? I mean, I didn't know what a drum fill was. But
I know what you mean, but a jazz player, if I can paraphrase, a jazz player is responding in the moment and changing everything all the time, whereas a traditional, more pop, commercial-oriented approach would be to play patterns. and time that's pretty repetitive, and break it up occasionally with little fills at the end of phrases.
Correct. Fortunately, I had enough. And in my effort to constantly make a living, since I left home out of high school and went on the road, that I thought I was a big star because I was making $200 a week in 1965, and I had a big Chevy with a 4-speed on the floor. I thought I was the man. Well, that job folded, and then I had to get work. Then I learned what it was to starve and have to get work. So as a result of that, I was in Texas, and I ended up on a blues type circuit. So, and I played with many great famous blues guys. I won't go into all that, but fortunately those guys, it was mostly shuffle, so it was kind of like a jazz gig. And in those days, you didn't play the stock fills that we have now. You kind of just played some jazzy kind of stuff here and there. So I had enough of that training to know that I couldn't go Elvin City in the middle of these funk gigs. You know what I mean? Even with Hancock. So that's good. So it just worked. And then also, I seem to have a natural ability to play my version of the James Brown stuff without having to work it out too much. I could kind of instinctively do it right away, and then I would fine-tune it at home until it made a little better sense.
Hey everybody out there in cyber world, this is Adam Nussbaum.
Hi, Dave DeCenzo here.
Hi, Bermuda Schwartz here.
Hey everyone, Stanton Moore here.
Hey guys, Johnson Pesta here.
Hey everybody, this is John J.R. Robinson.
Hi, Todd Zuckerman here for the Drum Center of Portsmouth. They're knowledgeable, they'll be able to help you and guide you and make the right choices for you and the music that you play.
From Wingnut to Wuhan, these chaps know what they're talking about. Highly recommended. But what do I know? I'm a drummer.
That's a good point about the shuffle. Shuffle is kind of common ground between blues artists, jazz artists, funk artists, rock artists. Everybody plays the shuffle.
And there's several different kinds too, right? Yeah, you know what I mean? We could really go into that. I love playing a great shuffle. I love playing the, flat tire, the backdoor shuffle, Texas shuffle, what we used to call the back half of the shuffle, where you just crack the 2 notes and the bass drum plays the other 2, on and on and on. And the shuffle with no backbeat, just like, you know what I mean? And that can swing real hard if everybody's hip to it.
Some people just play the upbeats on the snare drum. There's all kinds of ways. Art Blakey had his way of playing it, and
that's a whole other
it's Stubblefield. Yeah. So when eventually this style began to emerge in Oakland that was different than what everybody else was playing, and you were part of that. Was there some recognition at the time that you guys were coming up with some hip new shit, or it was just what you were playing and gigging? Or
no, we thought we were bad. I'm sorry. Ask me that.
Bring me into that.
Okay. Sorry, I just had a big Starbucks right before you called, so I'm like, I'll chill out. We'll taste. All right. So
it's a drummer thing. We're all that way.
Okay. Let's see. Yes, that kind of drumming was the war cry of the streets of Oakland. That's what you heard when you went to a club. I was one of the original guys, and so was David. And oddly enough, there was a place called the On Broadway. And the first time I heard David Garibaldi, and he heard me, it was kind of like we weren't exactly alike at all. We're quite different. But that Oakland thing we were both doing, and I hadn't heard him do it. I hadn't even heard about him. I don't think he'd heard about me, and I told him afterwards, what? It was great. He was so great and funky. I was like, oh my goodness. And then he heard me, and he was like, hey man, we're kind of like thinking alike. You know what I mean? And but actually, in Texas, there was a great drummer who later moved to Sacramento named Ray Torres, and he played on Bruce Chanel's Hey Baby with Delbert McClinton. And I heard him playing the broken thing in like 1965, much different than myself and Garibaldi, but he's the guy that opened the, just hearing him, that led me to start investigating that, because it was very interesting, for me. But in closing, all the drummers started, then Gaylord Birch started to take that style, and then everybody did, and everybody kind of had their own way of dealing with this quote unquote Oakland style. And when you went to a club and got out of your car, you could hear that shit out in the street, man, and you'd have to try not to run in the club. That's how I did. We were young too, so it was like our banner.
Call to arms. Yeah, that's kind of the way I think about New Orleans. You get out
yes.
to this day. You get out of the car. You walk towards the club, and wow, man, something hits you before you get in the door.
Indeed. Yeah, I hear you.
What do they mean by linear, do you think?
My new site, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, is the perfect online drum learning platform for any level drummer to learn how to play the drums the same way I did, with the advantage of having me road test the material on hundreds of stages, countless clinics, lessons, and master classes, and dozens of studio sessions every year. On the site, you'll find over 13 hours of video, dozens of written lessons, and fresh material gets added all the time. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you as subscribers on the site, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
I've never known that, and I'm supposed to be one of the. Yeah. I guess maybe a straight line from point A to point B. I've never understood and even students have explained it. Oh, well, Mike, linear is da-da-da. It's when you hit a different limb on a different part of the instrument and there's no coordinated independence, maybe a little, it's all at a different time. I guess when I hear that word, those are the type of things I think of. You know what I mean? But who knows?
I think of not layered. In other words, not two limbs hitting at the same time, though you often do that as well.
Right. Exactly. Well said.
And if you graphed it out, if you don't ever hit two limbs at the same time, you could connect them with a line, hence linear. I don't know.
Right.
If you don't know, I damn sure don't know.
When I played with Hancock, and once you went to the ride cymbal, and you were no longer into that beat, I was just coming out of Philly, Roy, Elvin, Tony. We were blowing. I didn't go dang, dang, a dang. It was like a 8 note, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the improv wasn't. It wasn't. It was not that. Mm-hmm. Eventually I started doing that because everybody was doing it, and sometimes you'd play with guys that thought if you use jazz language. That's what Actual Proof was. Right. It was like my version of Jack, Tishanet, Roy, now he sings, now he stops, Tony and Miles, Elvin and Train, Philly and and but eventually you'd play with guys that only understood funk, and they would be like, when I'd go over the bar or play any poly stuff, we were into the polyrhythm stuff back then.
Right. They didn't get it.
I knew Tony a little bit and talked to him about it, but it would throw guys off. They would be sure that and they'd say to me, "You're getting off," and I'd be like, "I'm trying to, bro."
That's the point.
Do you dig?
They meant it a different way, though, right?
Of course they did. Yeah, they sure did. They didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, Herbie had that background. I mean, he was a jazz player. The great stuff he did with Miles in the '60s and all his Blue Note records, and it was something of a new thing for him to go that direction as well. But you had that shared history, which is why I think it works so well together.
Right. Yeah. No, he had no problem with that. He was such a genius of humanity and of not just music, of being a human. He was just this person that everybody loved, and he was accessible and youthful and funny, and you could wrestle with him. You didn't have to be all jazz and
Mr. Hancock. Yeah.
And he was a cool cat, and like but yeah, he knew, so he didn't have, but he would track, here's where I got off track. He would track you like radar. He could hear every breath you took, and he would interact with you that way. Even if it was just playing straight time, it didn't matter whether you were doing a lot or doing hardly anything. He was hearing the whole picture like Elvin and Train did, and that's how I hear. I hear the entire picture, and I play from the inside out.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. So the music is informed by jazz, we might say, in that it's highly interactive and non-repetitive. Were you surprised to see that style sort of devolve, this is my opinion, into instrumental pop music?
Well, let me put it this way. When I came to New York in 1979 to play jazz, and romantically and naively, I'd been here before, and I knew most of the guys, but still I'd never lived here. So I came here with the idea of I'm going to play loft jazz, like with Sam Rivers and these people, all of this I'd heard about, And so
Excuse me, for people who don't know, this is the loft scene in New York that happened in the 70s, I guess.
60s and 70s.
Late 60s, early 70s, where people took control of their music and they would have their lofts and bring people in, and it was kind of out.
Yeah, very. Yeah, and it was kind of out. Yeah. anything could happen, all kinds of playing, And so, but when I got there and I went to my first loft, I was so excited. They played Mr. Magic, and that's when I knew. I said, things have changed and not in the direction that I want them to. So as far as, when the Headhunters started to become very commercial, and I left. We started to sound, we were an innovative band, and it was interesting for me at first. And then it sounded like a group that needed a singer. We were playing like straight time, and guys were soloing, and I started to become unhappy. And it's cool. I mean, it was, I just decided to roll the dice and come to New York. And, right after the Hancock gig, Eddie Henderson hired me, and I played 1 year jazz gig 5 nights a week. I don't know who's got luck like that. A sit-down gig in San Francisco. It was Joe Henderson, sometimes Pharoah Sander, Mark Levine, Hashima Mark Williams on bass, James Leary on bass, Julian Priester, Dave Liebman. It was like, I'm like, really? So, and then I went out with, and then I did want to try my hand at fusion, because I didn't consider the Headhunters fusion, and I saw Billy and Lenny and these guys blowing up, and it looked like fun. And so I'm a Buddhist. I actually chanted, I'm not trying to bring everybody into Buddhism here, but I actually chanted about, I need to do a fusion gig. And out of nowhere, Percy Jones from Brand X called me, and he goes, Phil Collins too busy to play in this band all the time. You want to come play with us? I went, sure. Mm-hmm. So that's how Brand X happened. It was just, I got this call, and I'm like, what?
So when you're approaching fusion, I mean, all drummers put the music first, all great drummers, and play what the style calls for more than their own personal preference might be. How did you approach that differently when it was more of a fusion group than a... Because I think of your work with Herbie as jazz.
Yeah, as what?
Jazz.
Yeah, I do too, or funky jazz or something like that. It's like the modern Horace Silver stuff of that time period, except it was Hancock and all he brings with him, his genius. But, at first I approached it kind of like, I don't want to say I'm stupidly, but yeah, kind of. Like I tried some Billy Cobham licks, some rolls, Tony, and I tried to do that. But then, as the music opened up, I started finding my own voice inside of Brand X, and then I just played. I've always had some complicated beats in my brain that I could kind of spit out, so I used all that came out. I'd never been able to record any of that before, and nobody had heard my chops before, because other than actual proof, the Headhunters was kind of a pocket gig, as they say now. Mm-hmm. They didn't want a lot of stuff going on, mm-hmm. Live maybe, but not on the records for sure. So Brand X was like, play all you want. So it was kind of like my answer to Hendrix and Train in a rock band, and I loved it. They were very creative. We went to Ringo Starr's house. I never met him, but he had a studio in Ascot called Startling Studio, and it was John and Yoko's old pad that you see in the Imagine, mm-hmm. the video Imagine. Yeah. And Ringo bought it from them and turned it into a studio, and we had cooks, and I stayed in John and Yoko's room. I didn't even know that, but it said John and Yoko to open the blinds on each side of the bed, and there was a 50 or 60 foot Tyrannosaurus with Ringo had built and looking right in the window of that particular. So when I'd wake up, there'd be this Tyrannosaurus. It was fantastic, man. And we made this record there, 2 records. 1 record, but they broke it into 2, and we finished it at another place called Farmhouse, somewhere out of London, what was like a bog or a swamp, and you'd look out this beautiful bay window while you're recording, and it was almost prehistoric. It was just like total jungle-looking forest funk, and we made this wild music, and it was, I loved Brand X. I still love those cats.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I got to ask you to tell the story about being at a trade show when you were known as a funk drummer, and in your heart you were a bopper, but nobody knew that. So you're sitting in a booth playing some bebop, right? Tell me the story.
Okay, I think this was in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. And Roy Burns, the great drummer, was there, and I was at his booth where he had the Aquarian heads and this and that. There was a lot of, those trade shows, there's a million drum sets. Buddy Miles he's a friend of mine from way back, and he was in kind of a wheelchair. He could kind of walk, and him and I had played some drums together, and so I sat down and I just started entertaining myself. There was nobody around. I started playing some straight ahead stuff, and some guy comes up and he says, I think he said, I see you're kind of influenced by Mike Clark or something to the effect of Chip Stern knows the story better than I did because he put it in Modern Drummer. But I do remember the guy saying, if you're going to play that style, you need to check out Mike Clark. And I didn't say a word. I went, okay, bro, I'll check him out. And Roy Burns was over there, and he goes like, how you like that?
That's a great story, man.
It is a great story. I told everybody. Everybody was cracking up. I told Vinny, all those guys. They were like, hey,
Well, thank you for relating that again. Let me ask you, you've become one of the most heavily sampled cats out there, like with Clyde and Jabo and those guys. Is that a compliment to you? Is it a drag for you? How do you feel about that?
Here's what I told Vibe magazine when they interviewed me, and this sums it all up. I dug the cred, but I'd rather have the bread. You dig?
Couldn't say it any better than that.
Thank you, sir.
That was my point. You guys gave, it's great cred that they would use you with all this multitude of drummers, but what do you get from it?
Yeah, no, they, all those cats, Dre, everybody, the only guy that ever paid me was Prince. And one day I went to my mailbox, and there was a check in there, and I didn't recognize the envelope. I almost threw it away, and I thought, let me open this thing. Yeah, and it wasn't from him personally, but from his business. Yeah, and he sent me a nice taste. You know what I mean? See, the reason we should have been paid is not just because those were my beats, but we own the publishing on God Make Me Funky and several of those songs, and so that's why. And getting paid is, especially those guys have millions, and some of them really like to go to court and fight. So I don't have millions of dollars to fight those guys.
It's very expensive to go to court.
Yeah, it is.
Over anything. My lawyers have always told me, look, the guy with the most money is going to win.
That's right. They're right.
If you want to do this, we can, but we need about $75,000 on retainer to start.
Exactly right.
And
if you have to get a litigator,
maybe we let that go.
Right. Yeah, I'm cool. You know what? I'm not bitter. I'm just saying. Anyway, that's it. I'm cool. I'm actually feel fortunate to have the career. I just finished a great gig last night with Eddie Henderson, Donald Harrison, Peter Zach, Essiet. Fantastic jazz band. 3 nights, 3 sets a night, like the old days, man. We were burning. All the greats came in. Billy Hart was in. Billy Harper, great drummer Sylvia Cuenca sat in and played fantastic. It was like one of those New York weekends where everybody went crazy.
Well, that's terrific.
Oh, it was wonderful, man. We were bringing it. So I feel blessed.
Well, you steered me where I was already going, which is to talk about you now. First of all, you had a book you put out few years back, right?
I did, yeah.
Tell us about the book.
Well, everybody had been hitting on me about my funk beats, so Hal Leonard, I talked to them about it, and I wrote a book, and my friend, a great drummer, Towner Gallagher, he did all the notations, so I could just sit there and rattle off my beats, and he could write them down almost as fast as I played them, and then I gave a little text to it, and I put it out, and I think, I don't have any copies here, but I think it's Innovative Grooves and Advanced Concepts.
That's what I wrote down. I looked it up on Amazon.
Oh, okay, yeah, and it did real good, and what it did was it got me tons of. David Garibaldi said, "Man, you're not going to make, the publishing deals are tough, on those books. It's like 90-10 for art, 10 for us, which is insane, but it opened the door." He said, "But it's going to open the door for hundreds and hundreds of clinics and colleges, and it gave me years of college clinics. So that's worth the price of tea right there. You know what I mean?" And
absolutely.
So I followed David's advice, and I'm glad I did. I've got another one I'm putting out here. I'm almost done. My post-bop stuff.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
I'll look for that. Now, you also have a lot of records out as a band leader.
I'm sorry.
You also have a lot of CDs out as a band leader.
I do, yes. Yes.
Very, very well reviewed by the mainstream jazz and music press. What's the characterization of those? Are they all coming from the same place or different stuff? I mean, I know the answers to a lot of these questions, but I ask for our viewers.
Well, like we don't eat the same. I mean, as an artist yourself, so but I'll answer the question the best I can. As you know, if you go to a jazz gig, it's different all the time. You have a brain full of years of information on all kinds, big band, this and that. Yeah, of course you do. And I mean, I know that about you. I've checked you out too.
I know you're being generous. A library of sounds that you have incorporated.
Yeah. So when you make a record, if you're lucky enough, you maybe have a group of friends, and some guys play this style better and some guys play that style better. I think it's if you're going to be a jazz artist, it's really important maybe to be able to cover the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and that'll tell you whatever we're doing now, early 70s or whatever, and and then I made my music out of that knowledge. So I make records. First, I made first couple of jazz records to prove my jazz point. This is how I play jazz. That was really unnecessary, but I did it. I didn't know. And now the jazz records I make are according to, like, it could be a trio with not much drumming, could be like just hard swing, or it could be like a lot of colors and a lot of playing. You know what I mean? Depending on, so I just keep, I try to make. The first few were similar. Now I'm trying to just play all the different stuff that I like.
Well, your records are amazing, and I encourage everybody to check them out. And each one's a little different and very cool. Very hip. The Mike Clark today is still as hip as ever. Tell me, you also have a new band, right, with Lenny White, a two-drummer thing?
Yeah, well, here's what's going on with that. Lenny and I are old friends, and we're writing a book together, and... he's a genius. He's like Herbie Hancock. It's not just that he's my friend, but he is my friend, but he's also a brilliant artist, not just a great drummer. Of course, he's a great drummer, but he's a great musician and a great person and a super concerned person and an intelligent, forward-thinking man. And same time, we love science fiction movies, and we're movie buddies too. So we go to all, superhero, monster, whatever. You know what I mean? Like Godfathers. But we're writing a book together, and not a drum book, not a method book, a methodology, but we're just talking about things, a lot of the things that we're talking about right now. And we have a band. We used to have a band called New Brew, and we did a couple of nights. Using, I think, if I'm not mistaken, well, for these guys for sure, Robin Ford, Stanley Clarke, Kenny Garrett, Eddie Henderson, oh my goodness, Lenny and myself, George Colligan on piano. Anyway, we recorded 5 or 6 tracks of this stuff, and I think, and we're trying to find stuff from the live gig that may be in the can. So Lenny's got a record label, and right now we're listening and making up our mind. Call this guy, don't put anything on this, maybe too much drums here, not enough, but we're putting it together, and we're gonna try to have it out when our book comes out, and then maybe coordinate a tour of a book and music tour, and we don't even especially have to have drum sets. We can really reach the people, or maybe so. And also, let me just add this: Lenny is such. I'm not just being. He's such a great artist that when you're playing with him, we don't compete. That's silly. You're not going to show that guy anything anyway. But I mean, we're really hearing each other just like Coltrane. I just hear him as if he was a tenor player and him me. And we get into these incredible grooves that are ridiculous, based on the Bitches Brew stuff that he did and my crazy funk, But I see him throw away ideas that he's kind of like this, that he's not pleased with, that I would die for. That's how good he is, man. And when he gets inspired, It's like having a 747 on the stage with you. All of a sudden, he can go into, like in Star Wars when they go into hyperspace, and you're like, whoa. You know what I mean? Like, man.
Well, that's, I mean, fair to say, you're not 25 years old, but you still have that passion, that energy and enthusiasm to reach and to grow. Don't you think that's an integral part of being an artist?
I do. I mean, you never arrive. It's a process until the day we're out of here. As long as I can keep playing, you know what I mean? Like, my hands aren't as fast as they used to be. I used to be able to play some loud, blazing singles and maintain them. Those days are gone. But something else is going on now that I think is even better. It's better for my musical mind. I'm much more musical. I can. Oh, can we talk about the ride beat a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah.
Excuse me. I'm not saying that I have a dirty, filthy, funky back alley ride
nasty,
beat,
stanky.
but I'm nasty, skanky. But I'm trying. That's the objective. You know what I mean?
Yeah. For the young viewers, those are all compliments.
yeah, exactly. That's the top of the world, guys like us, right? And so I try to dig that quarter note out. You know how everybody's like talks about jazz as if it's a triplet thing, and it is. But I'm not hearing when I'm swinging. When I'm doing my stuff, that's different. But when I'm swinging and I'm just wanting to hear some grease, it's all about the quarter note. I'm not hearing it's just tang, chang, tang, chang. You know what I mean? Like as if you were playing in an organ bar in Harlem at 4 a.m. in 1971. With Stanley Turrentine and Dr. Lonnie or somebody.
Grease, man, grease.
Total, So I'm always trying to. I work on my ride. I can never get it perfect, no matter what I do. You know what I mean? But it's getting better and better and much more comfortable. I can deal with bass players that play behind. I used to hate them. Now I'm putting some of their numbers in my book. It's me that's changed, not them. Mm-hmm. I'm learning more. I'm able to open it up more, to spread it out more, take more people in my life. Maybe I'm opening more internally, and therefore my splang-a-lang is a little better.
Well, the music becomes deeper, I think, as you get older. There's a great quote with Wynton Marsalis. Oddly enough, I don't know why I say oddly enough. There's a good quote with Wynton Marsalis on a thing about Louis Armstrong, where he says, those solos of Pop's later in life are almost impossible to play. Even though he didn't have the technical prowess he did as a young man, it's so imbued with nuance and sophistication and spacing of the notes and stuff that it's impossible to reproduce. And you see it with singers, too. They lose something in the pipes, but they get a resonance and a depth and a feeling and a ability to express that transcends how fast your hands are.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I got nothing to add to that. You just nailed it. Yeah, that's it, man.
Well, we'll sign it into law somewhere. Hey, one of the reasons I like to do these things on Skype is because we get a little insight into where you are, into your digs. I see that's a set of drums behind you. What about that stuff on the wall? Where'd that come from?
Well, my girlfriend, my fiance, is a journalist and now a professor of journalism at Columbia, but she also does documentaries. Her name is June Cross. She has a book called Secret Daughter that is quite a read. Her father was a very famous tap dancer in the 40s, and he had a big career. He hung out at Sugar Ray's place, and he was down with Sammy Davis Jr. and all those cats. I mean, this guy was a big guy, one of the first black artists to appear in a Hollywood movie with Ronald Reagan as a dancer, a lead dancer, and he's a tremendous, but the story of her life is equally as deep. And as it turns out, her stepfather is Larry Storch, the comedian from F Troop, who's a dear friend of mine, and he plays alto sax, and he's a hoot. He's 97, and he still does gigs, man.
I remember him. He cracked me up.
Right, totally. And I mean, I've been over at his house before, and Jake LaMotta was there and stayed 2 or 3 days, and we hung out with Jake for a couple of days. But anyway, she's into art. So the house has all kinds of art from all kinds of time period, different cultures, this, that, and the other. So that's what that is back there. Yeah. where you are right now is my gig calendar. I'm old school. I have one of those old white calendars with big black print so I can see where I'm playing. It's not all in my phone. Like my students, they're like, you know, what? You know?
There's still room for some old school and a very progressive thinking man. So see, that's why I asked. That's cool. I wouldn't have had that story if I'd have been interviewing you in a hotel room or something.
Right, absolutely.
All right. Well, I won't keep you any longer. We've had over a half an hour here. That's we don't want to get these too long, but that affords us an opportunity to do another one sometime, if you would be so kind.
Oh, I'd be honored. And I know that you're a great artist and a great drummer, and you have such great questions, and you have so much knowledge. I have a very serious suspicion that you know more about all this than I do, and that's real.
Well, you're being very generous, very generous. I love the music. I've lived it my whole life. I'm a working, gigging drummer, but I know when I get around the greats who I'm talking to.
I bet you could kick the you-know-what out of a big band. I'd like to witness that. You know what I mean?
Jim Catalano at Ludwig, he has a great way of saying it. He says, I'm a pretty good vibes player, but I know Gary Burton. You know what I mean?
I do. I know I'm a pretty good drummer, but I know Billy Hart and Ray White.
See, that's the thing. Everybody thinks that. We've all got heroes, but I certainly admire your career, and I thank you so much for being on the show. And let's do it again, okay?
Love to. Thanks, Mike.
All right, brother.
Well, thank you so much, brother.
This is your host, Michael Vosbein, and I'd like to thank our friends at Sabian Cymbals, Sound Synergies, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, and Drum Center of Portsmouth. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.